Hello, everybody. This is your host, Aram Melkoumov, and you're listening to another episode of the Product Innovation Series. Today, I'm joined by Marlon Hope, who's the head of product at Netacea. It's a software that detects and prevents bot attacks in a completely different way to the competitors in the market. Marlon, thank you so much for coming on our show today and giving me the time.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So the first question I have was something that came out of a conversation we had before, and I thought it was really interesting. And I think it would be really great for the audience to hear as well. Is apparently, from what you told me, a computer game made you a better product owner. so tell me more about that.
My mum would curse because growing up, me and a group of friends became obsessed with a computer game that has been known to sort of destroy marriages and all sorts, and that was it was formerly Championship Manager, but it's actually Football Manager. And as a kid, I wasted hours and hours. I don't even want to count how many hours I lost to that game. So for anyone who doesn't know, it's a football simulator game where you get to become a manager of a football team, and the objective is to sort of buy and improve your playing squads, play games, and ultimately sort of win leagues and trophies. And unfortunately, this game has no end date, so you can start in the year that you started in and go into 2045 or something like that, and bearing in mind that I was playing this game in the 90s, that's a serious amount of time that you can give up. But when I sort of look back at some of the principles that I have adopted in my career, I can actually see some of them started from playing this game. So a lot of my friends, when they played it, they would take on the biggest teams. They wanted to be Manchester United, they wanted to be Arsenal, they wanted clubs with lots of money, and they wanted to buy the most glamorous players. So they wanted to have, Ronaldinho playing for their club or a Messi playing for their club. So they would have Manchester United with all of the best collection of players around the world in their teams, and they'd spend huge amounts of money to win. My approach was completely different. I would go down to the lowest tier of professional football in England, to some side that anybody who wasn't on these shores wouldn't even know the name of the side. And my mission was to build them up from there, where they had absolutely no money. I would normally, because the playing staff weren't particularly brilliant, I would normally start by selling off the best asset in the team, and then I would hunt around for the optimum stats that I could find on the free transfer market of players that would actually come to me. So the stats were generally from 1 to 20. So in a really low league, if you had a striker with maybe pace 13, he was normally faster than everyone else in the league, so he'd get you quite a few goals. And I would build a squad up with very cheaply assembled but very specifically identified playing stats for people in particular positions. And then we'd get promoted, and then I would sell off those playing staff because they were at their peak value at the end of that season when you've been promoted, and their value would drop as you moved into the league above. And then I would regenerate the squad again, and I would keep doing that right the way through. So you had Accrington and Stanley winning the Champions League 3 years in a row.
That's too funny. I have the same kind of thing I did with like an F1 Champions Manager kind of game. So very similar. It just reminds me of, there's a show with Jason Sudeikis on Apple TV, which is about a football team. I can't remember the name right now, but it's kind of similar. Like it's like basically like a lower tier football club in England who's like trying to get back into.
Is it the Ted Lasso?
Ted Lasso. Yeah. Yes, Ted Lasso. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's interesting. So you kind of figured out ways to like optimize, and then ship something and then sell.
100%, and for me, it was all about processes. It was about spotting patterns. It was pattern recognition. It was about attribute recognition and working out how you put different components together to get a positive outcome. So even though the individual components you had might not have been desirable, actually, were you to pair it with something of beneficial or that complemented it, you could get quite desirable outcomes. So I think being a product manager, generally you don't always have the perfect environment to be able to achieve excellence. There's always some form of compromise that you have to make. Maybe you don't have as good access to the customers. Maybe the time span that you have to generate a solution is limited. Maybe you don't have the resources that you need, or you don't have the skill sets that you need within the group. And you're constantly having to compromise and finding ways to maximize the capabilities within the group that you have. So that's kind of led me to doing quite a lot of different roles within teams. From time to time, the architecture, from time to time design, from time to time testing. Differences in stakeholder management, sort of user research, all of those elements. And obviously, when you have an ideal team and all those roles are filled, it's brilliant and it's great, and you've got the perfect amount of time and you've got the perfect amount of budget. Very few of us have the luxury of those positions. There's normally a heck of a lot of compromise that goes into things. But I think that mindset sort of stood me in a good stead for being able to identify how we could utilize the attributes within the teams to progress.
No, that's so true. I think it's a use case for every head of product. You got to maximize what you have, by whatever means necessary. Let me jump into some product management related questions. You mentioned something about first principles, and that's kind of the way that you operate. So maybe first question is, what do first principles mean to you? What are they? And then I'll have some follow-up questions to that.
Yeah, by all means. So for me, first principles is all about sort of stripping everything back. There's a lot of noise out there. We have lots of strategies and ways forward. Agile is a really simple manifesto, but there are so many artifacts out there that profess to have the answer for how we go about sort of developing things. And they are effectively toolkits. They are a series of methods that we can use some or part of to find a way forwards. But in general, product development is a relatively simple notion. We have a problem, and we have a problem that affects certain individuals. We have a business that has a certain objective that it wants to achieve, and we kind of need to find the straightest line through that problem and achieving business objectives. So quite often when I talk about first principles, is about stripping everything back, going back to a whiteboard, being able to map out these individual problems and be able to sort of plot our way through to get into the final answers. And generally, in terms of the way that I work and my teams work, we try and eliminate the noise, give ourselves a clear picture of where we're going, and then we start to layer on all those other techniques to be able to build out. And that's really the platform that we build from.
And when it comes to problem solving, how do you strip down the main roots of like the issues or the problems that you identify? Is there any specific approach, framework? I don't know. There's like the 5 whys methodology. There's like a few, but I'm just curious. How do you go about just looking at, what you have to figure out and just like pinpoint exactly, okay, what is like the real problem there?
it's sort of along the lines of the 5 whys, but more in terms of, I think where we go, where I tend to go to, and what I try and teach my teams to do, is let's boil things down to the things that you do know. So we've got a problem, and at the moment that problem seems unassailable and unachievable. And let's say that that problem is 15 steps wide, and I know step 2 and I know step 7, but I don't know any of the rest of it. So at this moment in time, you say this problem looks unachievable. We'll say, well, I know step 2 and I know step 10. These are immutables. Everything else in between is up for grabs. So what I tend to do is I say, okay, well, let's make an assumption that gets us from step 1 to step 2. Right? It doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong. Let's make an assumption, and then let's make an assumption between step 2 and step 7, because that's the next biggest gap. And then let's follow those assumptions through. And then along those ways, we'll say, actually, well, step 3 was wrong, but we've got a good step for step 4. And actually, I can now work out step 4, 5, 6. That gets me to 7. And then I can work back and close the gap on step 3. So for me, the key thing is making informed assumptions about where you're going. Use the data points that are available to you. So in many cases, it will be, if we're looking at a user-based system, what does that user want to achieve? Can I get access to that user? If I can't get access to that user, how can we replicate that? Well, most of us use software and technology in all parts of our lives, whether it be online shopping, online banking, buying a house. We use technology. So we're in positions to make assumptions. It's just important that we're able to validate them. So I think it's reasonable to assume that we should know what is a reasonable response time for, I don't know, browsing a page or bringing back search results, because actually, what would we accept as users? So there are opportunities to make assumptions, and then where we have the opportunity, we go out, we validate them with the most effective sources that we have. Also technologically, if there are technological steps that we want to take, can we map them out into the paper-based exercise? How do we validate those things as quickly as possible? If we have to commit to code, can we reuse? Can we stub things out? And for me, it's about quick experimentation, not being hung up to get the right answer, but plot a path, try, fail, go again, but do it quickly. And make sure that we take every opportunity to validate with the most effective sources that we have.
Okay, awesome. I want to go back a little bit into your career to date that kind of led you into product. If I recall correctly, you started off in project management.
Yeah.
And you also had some responsibilities around delivery. How did that help you to become a product manager?
So most of the project roles that I had were typically around change. So generally you would start off with a small area that you were looking at, and either the business or you would look for efficiencies. Maybe something was new, there were inefficiencies. You would hear conversations that were going around the business that something that was supposed to work effectively, there was always a problem at this handover point. Maybe people were grumbling, or somebody was complaining about, what they had to do with some work that was handed over to them. So many of the roles that I had were about, how do we improve this process? How do we make it more cost efficient? How do we improve our ability to sell within this area? And as part of that change, like I said, again, first principles, looking at the system end to end, looking at the different parts that are involved, and finding out that John in this department filled in a spreadsheet and then sent it over to somebody else, and that was supposed to be it complete. But actually, when it came over to Steve, Steve had to configure that spreadsheet in a completely different way, add a whole new different set of variables, and then send that on to Mavis down the corridor. And Mavis then had to then input these numbers into a system that came out into the final report that the manager wanted. And there's all these series of waste that was going on, and working in that way and looking at how we improved process often led to opportunities for system change or system development. And a lot of the work that I was doing was around writing the specs for new systems that we could bring in, or working with third parties and vendors to customize off-the-shelf solutions so that they would work within the environments, within the organizations that I was in. So I suppose I was in a position where I was kind of that customer having a problem within the organization, and identifying the solutions that were needed and working with engineering teams to be able to have that solution. And I suppose that really sort of made the natural progression to I enjoyed more being on that technology side, solving those problems, being that voice for customers that knew they had a problem but maybe didn't know how to articulate the problem. You know, the customer that said, you see this spreadsheet, I kind of want it on a web browser. And it's like, do you know what? I'm going to blow your minds. with what is possible, I'm going to blow your mind. And taking it beyond just people sort of replicating things that they worked really hard on in their environments and worked well for them, but they knew they wanted some kind of an advancement, but they didn't know what technology could do for them. That was something that was really exciting for me. And a lot of my early stage projects were very much internal product development, and then sort of moving into your sort of more external product development. So developing technology for consumers, developing sort of content, and then moving into sort of more product as a service and those sorts of areas in sort of direct product companies, in sort of more business to business. So and the challenge is one that I've always enjoyed, and it's very much that case of being able to solve problems for customers that they don't fully know they have, or they don't really appreciate they have. That's the thing that has been really exciting for me.
Through your time in delivery that you've worked on different projects, what are some like common myths that you've seen come to be when people think about delivery, and like maybe what holds them back from going and doing any kind of delivery work?
I don't know if myths are the right word, but in terms of the things that are challenging to delivery, the things that are real challenges to delivery is, the first thing is, right out the gate, is, did you understand the problem you needed to solve? Right. One of the most common areas that I've seen projects fail is not understanding what they needed to achieve. And that manifests itself in a number of ways. One of the first ways is having no idea when to stop, having no understanding of when you've delivered something, or when you're failing to deliver something, or whether the project should be killed. Actually, maybe it was reasonable that you didn't know all the answers at the beginning, or you didn't know whether it was going to be successful, but partway along the journey it becomes apparent that that project or that deliverable isn't going to be successful. It's not going to deliver what you want to do, and the best thing for it is to kill that project and save that budget, or to reassess, is there another way that I need to do this based on the information I have? But if you don't have a clear idea of what you're trying to achieve, it's really impossible to make those decisions. So I think that's a massive one. That's a really, really big one. Also, having a really valuable metric for understanding how far you are through work. One of the biggest killers of projects that I've seen is oversized tickets. The first thing that I see if I see anything over 5 points is I want to see that broken down. I like seeing small deliverable things that give you a chance of succeeding, and give us quick turnaround times, quick feedback times. It's one of the most horrible things. I spent a lot of time being parachuted into projects that were struggling. So projects that projected to deliver over time, or weren't seemingly delivering anything. And the fastest way, and anyone who's worked with me in this capacity will probably chuckle to themselves, because they say Marlon's favourite thing is burning tickets. So bloated backlogs, I just kill the entire backlog. Anything that is superfluous dies. If it's important, it will re-emerge again. So I kill all superfluous tickets. The first thing that I'm doing is looking to see how we claim points. So large tickets, right, what aspects of that has been delivered? Let's hive that off into another ticket. Let's split these out. This 20, 30 point monstrosity, let's break this down so that we've got deliverables. People get lost in huge tickets. They're often too complicated. They don't ask for help at the right times. We don't get the validation, and before you know it, we've lost so much time, and generally it ends up becoming so complex that people kind of just lose what they need to do. So yeah, oversized tickets, bloated backlogs with things that you will never get to, massive time wasters, and massive drains on delivery capability.
But no, it's very true and very interesting. I could definitely relate to that. How has been, because I know you're non-technical, right? In terms of your background, how has being non-technical helped you in your product journey?
It helps in a number of ways. The first one, and starting out in this industry, the first thing is you have massive imposter syndrome. So although I've said that I spent the early part of my career in change management and sort of writing specs for systems, when you step on the other side of the fence, and you're working with delivery teams, and they're sort of talking about how they build things, and actually they start talking about things that you haven't quite thought about. So they start talking about these weird things called non-functional requirements, and they're talking about security, and they're talking about performance testing and penetration testing, and load times and response times. And it's like, well, nowhere in the specs that I was writing were I talking about this. I was talking about the screens that I need, and I need to be able to do this, and I need to be able to log in this way, and I need these sort of permissions. So all of these things start to be really complicated, and people start talking about, how your data is structured, and, how your data moves from one place to the other, and how it's converted and manipulated into these different formats. It becomes quite daunting, because you realize there's a heck of a lot of stuff just about computer architecture, and how these things come into being that you don't know. And yeah, there was a huge amount of imposter syndrome. But I think one of the things that I think is a good thing about me is the things that frighten me make me work scarily hard. So I consume all knowledge of everything around me at all times, because I hate being that person in the room that's letting everybody down and really shouldn't belong. So one aspect is that. The other aspect for being non-technical that I think is advantageous is, and I say to my teams, if you can deliver technology that I can understand and I can work with, anyone can use it. So in terms of usability, I consider myself to be a technological EMP. I'm absolutely terrible with tech, absolutely terrible with it. But for that reason, and there's a scene in Philadelphia. Tom Hanks comes in and he's going to speak to Denzel Washington as a lawyer, and he turns around and says, "Explain your story to me as if I was a 4-year-old." And what I force people around me to do is explain things to me as if they were a 4-year-old. And in them having to simplify their explanation, one, I think it gives them greater understanding, because having to simplify what they're doing actually solidifies their understanding of what they're doing. Being able to communicate that some of the challenging, more technical aspects to me also gives me an understanding, but also as a product person, it gives me the ability to then be able to advocate for them in all of the areas of the business that I need to. So I think being non-technical forces us to speak at a common language point. I don't know how positive that is that I'm saying my common language point is that of a 4-year-old. But yeah, being in that position, it helps us. It helps us simplify what we're doing in a way that makes it easy then to be able to communicate out to other audiences.
That's very true. Everything in life, I frequently use the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
With everything, so that everybody understands. A last question. I wanted to have an opportunity for you to tell us a bit more about Netacea. Yeah. So how does it work? What's different compared to other bot solutions out there in the market?
Okay, well, Netacea is effectively an agent intent analytics platform. So as a system, it sort of protects customers' websites and APIs and helps them manage traffic on their site by sort of detecting whether the intent of the actor across those websites and APIs is malicious or preferred. Mm-hmm. So in essence, we run a series of behavioral analytics modules on all interactions before they hit sort of customer APIs, to kind of understand the patterns of behavior and whether or not they are the types of behavior that the customer is looking for. So we're effectively protecting against online attacks like account takeover, scraping attacks, scalping attacks. So for instance, Nike bring out the latest edition of trainers, and you have a bot that will scalp all of those in sort of under a second. Our technology helps detect those actors from trying to get you the latest and safeguards real customers from being able to get access to products. So yeah, that's sort of broadly what we do. We do that on a macro scale. We sort of handle sort of billions of requests per month for our customers, and we're sort of broadly dealing with sort of globally based websites across multiple industries: telco, retail, financial services.
That's really cool. It's a very exciting industry and market. There's tons of malicious kind of actors out there now. I've dealt with a few recently, so I could totally relate. A last question for you, Marlon. We talked about first principles. We talked about, keeping everything simple, stupid, explain to me as a 4-year-old. I love these things. Any other one or two product lessons or principles that, are key to you in terms of how you operate?
Data. I've talked a lot today about first principles. I've talked about making assumptions, and a lot of those things can seem quite internally focused. It's sort of my opinion or team's opinion and what have you. And we all know that actually to be effective in anything, we kind of need to look outwards. We need to have an eye on who our users are, what they need, and how they work. So for me, data is absolutely massive. So understanding what you're trying to achieve and what the criteria for success is, and measure all the time, measure how you're meeting up to those standards, whether or not you're looking at conversion funnels, whether or not you're looking at end-to-end times or load times, or your performance. Measure at every single point of your product. Understand what metrics represent value for both the business in terms of the outcomes the business wants to achieve, but also for your end users as well, so that you know that you're constantly delighting them, and use that to drive the development of your service. Every business will always say, right, do you know what, I want to add a, but actually alongside those kind of business driven changes, look at things that push the needle. Look at things that push the needle on the value that is delivered to your clients. And I think for me, when you follow data, it's really hard to make wrong decisions.
Okay. So just a follow-up question to that last one, I promise, is a lot of people say, yeah, data, but it's being data aware, right?
Yes.
So like definitely the data is there as a reference point, but how much of that is like intuition and gut in terms of like the actual decision that needs to be made from that data?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of it that becomes from intuition and gut, but an intuition and gut that isn't just I feel, but I am immersed in. The teams that are making these decisions should be teams that are dedicated to the area that they're focused on. So they understand what the user outcomes need to be. They're immersed in the technology. They know where the technical debt is. They know the next 4 or 5 steps that they want to make in terms of the technology. So decisions they're made are informed by that holistic path that they're taking the technology on. So not only are they seeing changes, but they understand what those changes mean. Are they seasonality changes, so therefore not specifically impactful, or are they significantly different, and therefore warrant making those changes? So I think you can use intuition when you have a body of information. So I think it's important to immerse yourself and take all those inputs so that you understand what those data are telling you.
Okay, awesome. Well, that was great. I think that was a lot of knowledge that was shared there today. Thank you so much, Marlon, for your time. And always thank you to our listeners for tuning in. So I appreciate it. I think it's going to be a great episode.
Thank you.